we're back. And it's a good thing that I packed up like I wasn't gonna be back the same day because those batteries took a lot longer to charge than I thought they would. So I'm gonna go ahead and get out my pot. Now, we've added 2 coils and you know all the basics. You could continue making a pot with coils, just adding them exactly as we've been doing. But what if you wanna make a bowl or you wanna make like a vase where the walls of the pot go out and then come back in? What if you run into a problem with adding a coil? So let's go over those things. So remember, we're gonna just set our pot aside. First, I wanna show you how to increase the size of your pot. We will just start by rolling a new coil. Okay, remember, once you start to hear sort of that thumping, go ahead and do that candy twist to get your clay back into round before it becomes a bigger problem. Or, you know, you can just kind of squeeze it back into round. And remember, if one spot gets too thin, start your hands outside that spot, rolling and bringing your hands closer together. And then areas where you want to spread the clay out, start with your hands close together and move them out. Okay, that's way longer than what I need. So I'm gonna take some of that off. It's also still thicker than what I need. So I'm gonna keep rolling it. You want to roll out your coil to the same thickness as the coils you made before. How thick they are doesn't matter as much as making them consistently the same thickness. Go ahead and do a test fit here. That's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and with this coil, I'll show you how to increase the size of your pot to make it wider. And it's pretty simple. Let's go ahead and score everything here. Remember, we're just gonna score the top coil, and then we're gonna score down the entire length on one side of our new coil. And I'm just going 2 different directions because I feel like that scores my clay better than just going in one direction. And I'm gonna go ahead and cut a 45-degree angle here. And then just dab a little bit of water into the score marks on both pieces. And then we're gonna turn this over and start to lay it on. And now here's where the trick or the difference comes in. Previously, we just stacked the coil directly on top of the previous coil. And if we do that, if we just stack it right on top, it's gonna be the same width. If you want your pot to get wider, instead of stacking it directly on top, we want to push that coil out a little bit so that it's not quite on top of the previous coil, not sagging down the side, but just sticking out a little bit past the previous coil. And that's gonna allow you to gradually get wider. Now, the more you exaggerate that, the more you push it out, the wider that next layer is going to be, the quicker this is gonna become like a bowl. If you just want it to gradually change or just be a little bit wider, don't put it out so far. Keep it stacked more on top and only sticking out a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and do a shape that'll be like a vase where it'll go out a little bit and have a belly and then come back into a neck. I'm just gonna go out a little ways. And one thing that's really helpful here is when I look down at my pot, I can see the inside, the next coil down a little bit. Instead of it looking like it's stacked directly underneath, I can see that coil a little bit on the inside. Okay, and once that's firmly stuck, remember we're gonna allow that slip or that water to dry a little bit before we start blending things in. So I'm gonna go ahead and do my next layer. Now this time, I'm gonna use coils from yesterday. They are still pretty flexible since I dipped them in water, so I think I can still use them. If they were stiff or cracking at all when I tried to bend them, like right there wants to crack a little bit, they may not be ideal for use, but I think I can get away with using these today. And I'm gonna show you what you can do if you accidentally roll a coil that's too small, or maybe your pot is getting so wide that you can't roll a coil that's long enough to go all the way around. And it's really simple. You may have already guessed what you can do. So I'm just rolling out this coil from yesterday. I'll go ahead and cut 45-degree angles on this, and I'm gonna do it on both sides here. Oh, I scored the wrong side of that, silly me. That's why I usually cut it on the pot. Go ahead and score this. And I'll go ahead and score all the way around because that'll be fine. And put my water on here. Now, one thing you may want to think about when you're stacking your coils is you don't always want the attachment, the part where the coils overlap, to be in the same spot. Sometimes that area can be worked a little bit thicker or thinner than other parts of your coil. So whenever I'm adding my next coil, I try not to make that overlap happen at the same point. So I'm gonna stack this piece directly on top of the previous connection. That way I don't end up with a connection on top of it again. In this coil, I'm gonna keep flaring out, so I'm gonna stack it a little bit wide. See how you can see down in there like it's a bowl? Because this coil is too short, I need to add another coil. And that's pretty simple, right? Now this one's a little bit too short as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this longer one. It needs to be rolled a little bit thinner first. I'm gonna go ahead and cut one side of this at 45 degrees so that it's ready when I stack it. That's gonna go this way. So I'm gonna go ahead and score here. And then I'll wait and cut the other end so I can make sure it's exactly the right size. A little water. And I'm just pressing that on, trying to make it stick out the same amount as the other half of this layer. And then I'm gonna cut it down to just the right size here. Okay, and that was a really easy way to add another coil or to adjust if your coil is too short. And really, if your pot is very big, you may be rolling multiple coils. This may be 3 or more depending on how big your pot gets. But let's go ahead and add a couple more layers. I'm gonna continue to flare out a little bit longer before I start to come back in. And then we'll go over how to make it smaller, although you've probably guessed by now how to do that. And I'm gonna go ahead and wad up these little cutoffs so that they don't dry out too much, and I'll go ahead and roll them into a new coil. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this, let me do this. So I'm just leaning down and getting kind of eye level here and then cutting this at 45 degrees. So this is how I would normally do this. And now that the pot's getting bigger, I'm gonna have to do it this way more. All right, I think I'll probably go up a couple more layers before I start to bring it back in. But now I've got 3 layers added that haven't been fully bonded to each other yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and go back and bond these previous layers to the base. And so I'm just going to use my thumb here to press that clay down, and I can pull clay up from the bottom. Now, if you feel a big difference in how malleable, how soft your clay is that you've added today and your clay from a previous day, it may be easier to do this with a tool. Instead of doing this with my finger, I could switch to a tool like this to help me push that clay up and down. And we're just trying to blur that line that is in between the layers. And I'm doing this 1 line at a time, but you don't have to. I could do 2 lines at a time. But remember, we don't want to change the outside shape. So remember, we're supporting the outside with one hand while we work on the inside. And remember, we're not going to blend the coils on the outside of the pot. So we don't want to press so hard that it flattens it against my hand. And this is going to be easier to work on the table. And really just do this in the way that is easiest for you. If the tool works, great. If you get frustrated with the tool, you would rather use your fingers, do that. I find that the tools are easier when my clay is a little bit stiffer, but I like to just use my fingers if the clay is softer. The tool gets a little too clunky if my clay is soft. Now, another thing I could be thinking about while I'm doing this is getting the general shape of the pot the way that I want it to be. So like when we were making the pinch pot and you just pinch the clay out or pinch the clay in, using this tool when I'm blending the coils, I can help push the clay out into more of a bowl form if that's what I'm wanting to do. But if I was working on bringing it in, I'd need to be careful not to push the coils out. I can also use the tool to kind of like smooth it out like this, or use my finger to smooth it out like this, like we did when we were making the coil pots to make them wider. And I've just got my sponge over here, get a little bit of water to help my fingers glide a little bit more. So I'm using some pinching techniques here to really bring that clay together and shape the overall form. Now I'm not bonding this top coil yet because I had just added it and I wanted to make sure the lower coils were bonded first and give it some time to set up. I do want to check in on the outside of my pot right now. So you can see when I rotate it that the sides are flaring out evenly. If your pot starts to get uneven, say something like that happens to you, go ahead and take this time and use those pinching techniques to pull it back out, push it out with your thumb or with your tool to get it to be pretty even all the way around, unless you're not going for a symmetrical shape. That's just how I'm showing you today. You could totally use coils to make a pot that is not symmetrical. I think it's a good idea to practice making symmetrical pots because it helps you control the clay, and then you can break that rule however you want. So I'm gonna take a minute here to go around. You can see this coil cracked a lot. So I'm gonna go ahead and use my finger or my tool to go around and smooth that. You can see these coils are starting to blend together. So I'm gonna take a tool like this and redefine those separate coils because I want this to look like a coil pot when I'm done. At this point, if you're working on the side of your pot, it can be a little bit tricky to hold it up and work on it at the same time. So you can set up a towel like this to kind of cradle it. So I'm just gonna roll that a little bit. So that can hold my pot for me while I work on it a little bit more. This tool works really well for this too, to get down into those spaces between the coils and really smooth that out. Now right here I can tell I joined two pieces together, so I'm gonna work on that and try to get that to look like one piece. I can also use my serrated rib. If there's a really defined joint or crack, then I can score over it with my serrated rib and then smooth that back out, maybe use a little bit of water. But remember, be careful about adding too much water. That can make your clay too soft, and then it can start to collapse or be easily pinched into the wrong shape. All right, that looks a lot better. And with little crumbs of clay that you're probably gonna pick up on your tools, I encourage you not to drop them on your table, but to drop them into your bucket of water. That way you don't have a lot of clay dust. There's less crumbs to pick up when you're done working at the end of the day, and that just makes your cleanup a little bit easier. I also encourage you not to pour your water directly down a sink, but to let it settle, let the clay settle out before you pour off the clean water, and maybe just pour it all outside. Now, one thing about setting your pot up on its side like this is that one side, the side that it's sitting on, might start to go flat. If that happens to you, it's also soft enough for you to pull it back out and make it round again. The other thing you can do is kind of adjust your towel or what you're resting it on so that it doesn't push it flat like that. But it's clay, you can recover it. And so you see, I'm using the tool to do some of the work, but then I'll go back with my finger to kind of smooth it out. For me, the tool always seems to leave like these sort of flat faceted spots, whereas with my finger, it makes it more rounded and natural, which is what I want. You could totally be into those facets. Now, one thing, if you're not careful, that can happen is that your coils can look drawn on if you press too deep, and if like instead of the coil rolling into that crack, it becomes like a straight line. That bothers me personally, aesthetically, because I want it to look more natural, more like I put the coils together without any problems. But glaze covers a lot. Okay, I think that's gonna be good enough for now. I may find some things that I wanna correct later as I keep going, but let's go ahead and move this towel aside, and I'll go ahead and blend this top coil in. And remember, always support the outside when you're doing this. One thing that you might feel as you're pressing part of that coil down is that the coil starts to like rotate in. That's normal. What you want to do is just find a balance with the pressure that you put. So like as I'm pushing down, making sure that I'm also pushing out if I want the coil to stay out, or just keeping my finger firmly in place to keep the coil in place. Or if it starts to feel like it's popping out on the outside, keeping my finger on the outside there to support it, to keep it from falling off. Okay, so I've gone all the way around. I'm gonna go around again. So this time I'm moving the clay around more to smooth it than to bond it. So it's bonded, and now I'm trying to make it look better, getting rid of any unwanted texture. Okay, and so we're ready to go on to the next layer. Now, I sat down while I was working on this, but now that I'm rolling coils, I find it's easier to roll them standing up. Because I want this to be a vase, instead of continuing to flare out, which I totally could, I'm gonna do a couple of coils that just go directly on top of each other before I make it come back in. So I'm gonna go ahead and use these other bits of coil here before they dry out too much. Now, one thing you might notice is that parts of your coil pot might be shorter than others, and honestly, I just wouldn't worry about it. That's something that you can kind of adjust for at the end when you're doing the final coils. You don't need to worry about it this early in the game. Okay, so this coil is going directly on top of the previous one. I'm not flaring it out, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut 45-degree angle here. And on the other side of it. Use the next bit of coil. And since this one is gonna attach here, I'll go ahead and cut that 45-degree angle there. Now, honestly, you don't have to use up all your little bits of coil. You could just recycle them. That way you don't have to deal with putting multiple coils together. You may find that like where they overlap gets too thick and you don't like having that multiple times around one layer. I don't want to have to recycle anything. So I'm trying to use it all up. I've already got too much reclaim on my plate. This coil is a little bit thicker, so I'm trying to squeeze it a little bit thinner as I add it on here. And then just one last little bit here. So that's the next coil. And then remember, we're gonna add a couple more coils before we bond them. And I'm gonna go ahead and add all this back in before it dries out too much to be able to do that. And I'm just doing like squeezing it out and folding it over a couple times so that that clay I added back in really gets wedged in there. That only works because I'm using a very small amount of clay. Normally you don't want to fold clay over on itself, but because it's so small and I'm about to roll it out into a coil anyway, it's not a big deal. It's starting to go flat, so I'm gonna coil it or twist it. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm testing the length of it. This coil is way too thick still, so I know that it's gonna get a lot thinner. So I can tear some of that off pretty easily. And then keep rolling it out to get it thinner. But remember, we're not aiming for a particular length. we're aiming for a particular width. So the only reason I'm measuring the length is to make sure I have room to take some off to be able to keep rolling it to the correct thickness. Okay, that's good. Let's go ahead and attach that. Remember, don't add too much water. If you start seeing water build up in the bottom of your pot, squeeze all the water out of your sponge and dab it out. Or if you have a bit of towel that you can maneuver to do that. If water builds up in the foot of your pot, it can cause the connections, the bonding that we've done to weaken because it's rehydrating it. We want to let it slowly dry. We don't want it to get bone dry, but we do want it to get to kind of leather hard. Again, I'm stacking this layer directly on top of the previous one. I don't want to flare out anymore. Oh, that's the wrong way. You always want to go up the lower one. So since I went this way, if I cut that off, there's going to be a gap because this one's on the bottom. I need to go that way. Yeah, draw towards the lower one. Does that make sense? Hopefully you can see the difference. Okay, so I'm going to take a second and rotate this around and just make sure that my coil looks even. All right, and I'm going to do the third one before I start bonding. Third one. This one I'm going to continue to go straight up, but the next one I'll start to go back in and we'll learn how to do that. Okay, so go ahead and cut that 45-degree angle. Since this one's under, I want to cut back towards it. So that's the opposite of the way I did last time because I stacked it the opposite way. I hope that's clear. I hope you can understand what I'm saying. I don't feel like I am saying it very clearly, but hopefully you can see it. And we'll go ahead and bond those layers. We're just doing the same thing as before, just pressing it down into the previous layer or maybe pulling up. I like pressing down. You can go both directions. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you are blending that clay across the layers and that you're supporting the clay on the outside and you're not pushing it so hard that you're smashing the outside. You're not pressing so hard that you're deforming your shape. So depending on how big of a pot you made, you may be having difficulty getting your hand down in there to work on these coils. That's another reason why it's important to continue bonding the layers a little bit at a time. If you built all of this, you may not be able to get your hands down in it far enough to do this work once all the coils are attached. In addition to it being easier to do this while the clay is softer, if you wait and you try to bond everything when the clay is leather hard, the clay may not come all the way together. You may accidentally crack it instead of moving it around. So just like you can't keep working a pinch pot extremely once the clay has started to dry, you've got to make all those extreme or really big changes to the clay while the clay is very plastic. Take your time. First time you go around, you're just really getting the clay to be bonded to itself or to each other. But don't get lazy. Make sure you go back around and make it look good as well. Don't leave that rough texture from bonding it. So right now that clay is pretty sloppy looking. I'm gonna take my finger or my tool and go around and smooth it out. And remember to use those smoothing motions that we learned when we were making the pinch pots. I'm not trying to thin the walls here, so those smoothing motions can be faster. Instead of doing short strokes, I can do longer strokes to really make sure that texture is continuous. Now I'm going at a diagonal because I find that blends my texture best, and it's an easy movement for me to make with my thumb. I also find that vertical and horizontal lines show up as a texture more. Your eyes recognize that type of pattern more easily, so it can be more distracting, whereas a diagonal line is less distracting. So even if there's a little bit of a diagonal line left, it's less visible. Your brain doesn't notice it as much. Now, when I taught this lesson to high schoolers, there was always a few who did not like making coil pots, and they would always ask, how big do I have to go? When can I stop? Part of that was because some students really struggle with making coil pots, and if you're really struggling, that's normal. I think it's pretty normal to have a hate relationship with coils at first, and then realize how much you can do with them, or have like a pot that you want to make and realize that the only way to really do it is with coils, and then you slowly begrudgingly kind of like coils, and then you find, oh, they make really cool pots and I actually love coils, right? I think that's pretty normal to go from hating them to loving them. And it's also pretty, fine if you're just like, no, I don't like coils, and you never come back to them. That's okay. So when my students would ask, when can I be done? I would say it needs to be at least as tall as your hand. So if you put your hand down next to your pot, by the time you get up to the width of your hand, that's a good height. You've got enough practice in, I think, to say, I know how to do coils. But you can also keep going and make something bigger and better and cooler. So we're gonna keep going. I've done a couple of layers here where I'm building directly on top. So next, I'm gonna start to bring those coils in. And I'm also gonna look at my overall shape here. And I feel like this side is kind of bulging out more than this side. I don't know if that's a trick of the light. This looks pretty symmetrical. Yeah, this side feels like it's bulging out more. So what I'm gonna do here is try to use some pinching movements to bring that back in. Oops, really out around there. Some pressure here to pull this side out a little bit more. And it's important to do this while the clay is still very flexible. Okay, that feels more symmetrical. I'm not gonna play around with the texture on the outside yet because of how much I can move the clay. I'm afraid I'll indent it or something, so I'm gonna come back and work on that texture later when the clay is a little bit drier. It is time to roll the next coil, so let's go ahead and do that. Now, another problem you might run into if your clay is pretty dry is that it's cracking a lot. Also, some clays that maybe don't have enough grog in them. Just some clays like porcelain aren't as well suited to hand building as others. So if you're getting a lot of cracks in your clay, one thing you can do is take your sponge with some water in it and just run it down the length of your coil a few times, and then keep rolling. And that compressing the clay and adding that moisture back in should help with that. Another thing you can do, if it's really bad and that's not helping, is take a spray bottle and just kind of mist your work surface so that it's not as dry and it's not pulling moisture out of your clay. I don't want to overdo it on my surface because I'm not having that problem. And I could have the opposite problem where my clay gets too wet and doesn't hold its shape well enough to be rolled. Okay, so for this next coil, I'm going to start to bring it in. I want to collar the clay in, which is a wheel throwing term and maybe not exactly right to use here, but I just want to start to make the clay come inward. Now this time, what's going to be different, instead of stacking my coil directly on top of the previous one, and we're not going to flare it out either, right? We don't want to make it a little bit wider. We don't want to stack it directly on top. Instead, we want to make it slightly smaller than the previous coil. So now I'm going to push that coil in to where I can just see a little bit of the previous layer on the outside of my coil. So I'm just making this next coil a little bit smaller, shrinking it in a little bit. You can do this more extreme, bring it in more to make that choke point come in more quickly. You can just do it a little bit. So that's good enough for me. So you can see it's just starting to come in just a little bit, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut this here. Now, what happens here if you accidentally cut that bevel a little too short and your coils don't come all the way together? Let's say that happened. One thing you can do is if you bring your coils closer to each other, just check and see if that's too small, if that's shrinking more than you want. If it is, bring it back out to where you want it to be. So if there's a big gap, all we need to do, cut a little bit off of a scrap piece here, dip that in water, just completely dip it, and then tuck it into that space in between the ends of your coil. And we're just gonna blend that in like nothing ever happened. So that's how, if you accidentally cut your coil too short, that's how you can fill that. Another thing that might happen to you is, let's say you've got a big hole for some reason. The way that you cut it, there just ended up being a little hole. It'd probably be like a triangular shape. If that happens to you, all you need to do is take a little bit of clay. You can roll it out into a little skinny coil. You can make it into a little ball. Actually, a little teardrop shape will work really well here. And all we're gonna do with that, dip it in the water, and then push it in to the hole from the inside. We don't necessarily want to see it on the outside. And then whatever clay is left over, just kind of pinch that off. And then on the inside, when you're blending your coils together, you'll just blend that little nub in. And on the outside, when you clean up, you'll just smooth that over and blend it in. And the reason we don't press it in from the outside is so that there's not extra amounts of clay to work with. It's just barely visible. And that'll just get blended in. Okay, I'm gonna roll my next coil. And these next couple coils, I'm really gonna bring them in to create a closed form and probably a neck on this pot. And I've been forgetting to show you how to use the ribs. They just really haven't been necessary for me, so we'll have to talk about that hopefully on the next blending. But really, all you have to do is, instead of using the tool or your finger to blend, you end up using the rib. So if you know how to do that, now you know why we have the ribs, but hopefully I remember. Okay, attaching the next coil. Remember, score, water or slip. Oh, I should check on my slip and see if I can use it. Showed you how to make it and I haven't even used it. So remember, we don't want to stack it directly on top of the previous layer. We want to make it slightly smaller, so it needs to come slightly inward. I'm saying slightly, but you could be more extreme here if you want to. It's totally up to you. Now, when we start bringing that clay in, it is going to be a little bit more difficult to see what we're doing when we're adding layers. So I think I'm going to go ahead and start blending it together after this layer because it's just a little bit trickier. Okay, take a moment, check. See how my coil is slightly inward from the previous one. And you can use some pinching techniques here to really make sure that that's true all the way around. And if it's not quite true, if you need to trim up some of your coil, if you didn't quite make it come in as much as you want, you can go ahead, pull this apart, trim a little bit more off of that bevel, and then cinch that clay together and bring it in just a little bit smaller. So clay is so forgiving. That's one of the reasons I love it. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and sit down here for a second, blend these together. Okay, so this might be a little bit harder for you to see because now this is in shadow. Fortunately, you saw it when I was working on it flaring out and going straight up and down, so it shouldn't be too difficult to understand what we're doing here. Use your finger here if you want to. Start to bring that clay down and blend each layer into the previous one. You can also use a tool. I find that's a little bit easier at this angle for me. Now, another thing we want to be mindful of, careful of here, is that as you're doing this, you're putting pressure on the inside of the pot, pushing that clay outward a little bit. So you really need to use your outside hand to help keep the clay from flaring out. I've had students in the past who, when they did this step, they didn't support the outside a lot, and so when they would press on it, instead of their clay coming inward like they meant for it to, it would start to get flared out or straight up because of how much pressure they were putting on it. See how I'm doing that and how it's changing? So a real quick way to fix that, just be aware if it's happening to you and then press it back in before it starts to dry. And then make sure as you're working to keep that clay where you want it. Keep your hand there and really control the clay. Okay, and once it's all blended together, remember to take the time to go around and smooth out your texture. Use those swiping, pinching motions to really make the inside look good. If you're making a closed form like I am, you might be thinking, who cares what the inside looks like? You know, if you're making a bowl, it's a lot easier to feel like the inside is important. But smoothing it out is important both for your practice, right? Because if this is your first coil pot, you might as well practice and get good at this. It's also gonna help you out later when you're trying to glaze. Having a smoother inside texture, or at least a consistent texture, is gonna help glazing go easier for you. Whereas if you have a bunch of weird texture that's really rough, it might hurt your hand if you're trying to like reach your hand inside. It also becomes like, depending on what you wanna do with this. If you want this to be a vase, having a smooth inside is gonna keep it from holding on to water and moisture and growing anything. If you're wanting to use this as a bowl, something to eat out of, you definitely don't want to have a rough texture that would be difficult to wash and difficult to get all the way clean. Okay, so I'm just going around, making sure my texture is how I want it, and let's look at the rib. So why did I say we needed a rib? Well, we don't 100% need it, but it can be helpful if you're having difficulty with your texture on the inside. You can use your rib to get inside. Now, I have a couple different sizes of rib. In this case, a smaller rib is gonna work better because it's gonna fit in this space better. And I've got a really flexible one, which is nice. So I can use it, start at the bottom and work my way up. Remember to support the outside if you're doing this. And doing this with a rib, because it's smooth and you can do one long continuous stroke or motion, that's gonna give you an even smoother texture on the inside. But the rib for this project is really optional because you really don't even have to do this step of super smoothing it. If you're making a bowl or something that's a really open shape, using the rib can really help that shape look even better. And using it in a direction that helps push out the roundness of your shape and helps it really be symmetrical can be very helpful. Now I've got some little dry crumbs in the bottom of this. I'm just not gonna worry about them. They'll be fine. They'll either fall out later or I can blend them in when they've gotten good and stuck. So I'm gonna take a minute here to go ahead and work on my outside texture. I'm also gonna take a second to observe the shape of my pot here. It's feeling pretty symmetrical, so I'm happy with that. And I'm gonna go ahead and set up my towel again. And just remember, whether you're using your fingers or a tool to do this part, to just keep like little bits of clay if they get built up on there, to wipe those off occasionally so that they don't dry and then get stuck in your clay. as your pot gets bigger, laying it down on its side like this is gonna become more difficult. Like the clay is heavier, it's gonna be more likely to collapse on itself. So one thing you can do is you can support it with a hand on the inside. If that is difficult, if you need both hands to work on the outside, you can get some plastic or a dry sponge and roll it up and stuff the inside. You just wanna be careful that whatever you do this with doesn't have a strong texture to it so that it's not damaging the texture inside your pot, or you're just gonna have to be aware that you're gonna have to do some more work inside. You wanna be careful too, if you're using your sponge to do this, that your sponge isn't super wet, because that water will get into the clay and cause the clay to be more flexible, and then this will overextend or stretch. So you just wanna be very careful if you're using a sponge to do this. For that reason, I think that plastic is a better option for this. And if you're making a really closed form and you're not gonna be able to get your plastic back out, switch to paper. So if you have some extra newspaper or craft paper that you can wad up and stuff inside of it, you don't have to be able to get that back out. It can burn out in the kiln. One thing I also see a lot of students do is that they'll take their sponge and get it a little bit wet and then just wipe over the surface. That may feel like you're smoothing out the clay, but what you're really doing is introducing slip to the surface, because you're adding water to the surface clay, and that can actually weaken your pot, and those cracks or textures can come back stronger after the clay is dry. So you really don't want to add water to do your smoothing for this, unless your clay is leather hard. If your clay is still plastic, like mine is still very soft, I can gouge it really easily. You don't want to add water. If your clay is leather hard and you're having difficulty smoothing it, that's a good time to use some water. That's also a good time to use some scoring tricks. I'll show you on some of this texture right here. If your clay is really dry and you're having a difficult time getting rid of some textures like this, you can add a little bit of water. I'm just dabbing just a little bit, and then use your needle tool or your serrated rib to scrape across that texture. Adding more texture may feel like a step in the wrong direction, but then that actually allows that water to get in there and allows you to move that clay around more. And you'll actually be able to get it smoother. Now, you might notice that I'm switching tools or switching which end of the tool I'm using, and be wondering to yourself, what's the deal? What's the difference? When should I switch? When should I use one tool versus another? It's all on what works for you. There's not a right or wrong here with what tool you use. It's which tool is getting the results that you want. And if you have tools like this, remember you can also use those. All right, now the last thing I want to do here before I transition to adding more coils is I want to take a look at my overall form. Make sure that it's still feeling symmetrical, the shape that I'm looking for. And then I'm also going to take the plastic out. Make sure I squeeze it in really tight so that I can pull it out. As I bring the lip in more, I may not be able to fit the plastic in it as much, so I may have to work with the pot sitting upright more. You just gotta monitor and adjust. Just do what works for you. Move that aside. And since this clay is a little bit drier, I'm just putting some water on it with the sponge to help it be a little bit more flexible. Part of the clay being flexible isn't just that you can bend it, but also that it's able to stretch as you're rolling it. Okay, I think that's a good thickness now. If you're ever rolling a coil and you feel like, I don't know if this is the right thickness, sometimes you just get into the weeds on a pot and you kind of lose perspective. One way that you can double check that is stack it on your pot and look at how tall it is compared to how tall the previous coil is. and that should help you out. If it feels significantly skinnier or thicker than the previous coil, you know you need to make some adjustments. Okay, again, I'm bringing the coils inward, so when I stack this coil on here, it's going to be slightly smaller than the last coil. And then I'm just looking at it, checking the symmetry, checking that that outside line is going the direction that I want it to, and then I'll go ahead and cut this. Okay, next coil. I actually need to get some more clay for this one. Okay, put the rest of that back in my bag. Add on my next coil, and I haven't decided yet how skinny I'm gonna make it. I think I'm just gonna do whatever feels right. Okay, and I think I'm gonna do one more layer before I bond these. I think just one or two more layers and I'll be ready to start making like a neck. So let's go ahead and bond these. Ooh, that coil's real soft. That fresh clay out of the bag is so much softer. Okay, so that's all smooth on the inside. I'm gonna go ahead and work on the outside texture for a little while. And then I think I might wrap it up for today. Those last couple coils that I added are just really soft clay. And I think I want the clay to homogenize a bit more before I keep going forward. And this time, now that the pot is so tall and curving inward instead of outward, I can see the coils well enough to work on it while it's right side up. So I'm just doing that. Also, because the pot is bigger, it's heavier, the clay's still pretty soft, I'm concerned about it collapsing in on itself. And I don't think I can get some plastic in there to support it and still be able to get it out without deforming the body. Okay, I think that's enough progress for today. We've done a lot and the clay is pretty soft and I'm concerned about accidentally smashing it as I keep working upwards. Also, there's a big difference between this clay that I just added and this clay from earlier today, and I want that to homogenize a bit more before I keep working. And it's probably about time for some battery to be changed. So I think I'm gonna just wrap it up for today and we'll come back tomorrow. Now, I am gonna do this a little bit different today because I want the clay to dry a little bit. instead of pressing all the air out of the bag, I'm actually gonna wrap this up into a bubble. Just use this bag, which is a bag that clay came in. These are really great to hold on to and use for this purpose. So the first thing we need to do is to go ahead and open it up, and you kind of want to gather it up into your fingers like this, and then kind of open it up. The best thing I can compare that to is like gathering up pantyhose to put them on, which I know isn't going to hit for most people. So also like a sock, when you gather up your sock to put your toes in first, it's pretty similar to that, but really we're just wrinkling the sides down and setting it up so it can stand up on its own on the flat base of the bag. Set the pot down inside of it. Now, if your pot was really dry, you would want to press all the extra air out, right? So if your clay is really dry, when you pull this up, you would just want to press the clay, press the bag really nice up against the pot. Not so much that it causes damage to the pot or puts texture on it, but so that there's no extra air besides what we can't help being inside the pot. But I want my clay to dry out a little bit, but I don't want it to dry out completely. So the best thing to do with that is to puff up your bag, gather the top together, and see how that makes a nice air bubble. So now my pot can dry a little bit, but it's limited. There's not infinite air for the water to evaporate into. So it's gonna dry. It might get to leather hard. It might be like a soft leather hard, but I need it to stiffen up so that I can keep working on it tomorrow. And then I'm just gonna move that aside, and that's gonna be a little bit tricky, so I'm just gonna slide my fingers under here, pick up the bottom, and then I'm gonna clean up like normal. I've got these coils that I started today, but that clay is really soft and they're not worth keeping. So I'm just gonna wad that back up. So remember, if you have some coils, you think you're gonna come back later, you can put them in a bag. I don't plan on coming back, so I'm just wadding mine up because they won't really be that good tomorrow. You might get lucky and they're good, like I did today, but most of the time they're gonna be too dry to work with. Remember with your fresh clay to press all the air out of the bag and then seal it closed. Twisting the bag shut is not as effective as simply pressing the extra air out and wrapping the tail under the foot of the bag. So doing this can work, but I find that often that just untwists if you don't do something with it. I found it actually works better for me if I just press all the air out and then just tuck that tail underneath it to keep it nice and sealed. Okay, make sure all your tools are clean. That doesn't have to mean wiping them all off. If you've cleaned them along the way, they may not have clay on them. And I'm just wiping them off with a sponge. Remember, cleaning your tools is important to protect your tools, to keep them from growing mold or getting rusty. Also, with tools like this one, it doesn't seem like, this is probably aluminum, it won't rust, the wood's coated, and this is just plastic. Still, leaving clay like down in this groove can cause it to hold on to moisture, and the moisture can degrade the glue that holds this together. Same here at the bottom of the ferrule, or the ferrule is this metal part. So keeping your tools clean and dry is important for making them last longer. And I don't always dry my tools on a towel if it doesn't feel like they need it, or if I know that I can leave them out to dry. I'm gonna go ahead and empty my water. Now with your water, see how it's probably dirty like mine is? We don't wanna pour this directly down your sink because that clay can build up in your drain and clog it up over time. So I have a sink here that my husband built for me that is not actually plumbed. It uses a recycled water system. So this goes in, it goes through a filter, and then the filtered water comes back. I'll leave a link to the video of him making that in the description if you want to know more about that. So I can pour this straight down my sink, but what works even better is if you keep this in another bucket, you let the clay settle down to the bottom, and then you can pour the clean water that's on top out. Also, you can put this into a recycle bucket. If you have a bucket system for recycling your clay, you could do that. But I have a bucket in my sink that I'm gonna pour this into, let it settle, and then I'll drain off most of the water and put this settled clay into my reclaim. And then I need to wipe my board. That's how much clay I got off of there. When you're wiping down your board like this, if you have a canvas board like I do, or if you're using plywood, it's really important to make sure that you don't soak your board. Even though I wiped this down and it looks completely wet, notice the sides, how far down the water went. It didn't go down the side here. It's just the surface that's damp or wet. It's really important not to soak this through because it will warp. It also causes it to just wear out, right? It just ages it faster. Just take good care of your stuff and it'll last you a long time. See you tomorrow.